All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly tnAchieves webinar where Chrissy and I talk a little bit about what's happening in the mentor program with some best practices and tips. And today what we're going to cover is how to be working with your students as they prepare to begin college. Some of them began this week, actually, so they've been going to class now for a couple of days. Most of the colleges that we work with will begin next week. But it's that time where your students have finally gone through the process. They've applied, they've done their FAFSA, they've gotten all of those back end things done, and they're ready to show up. And so today we're going to talk about what you can do to support your students in this really crucial time. A couple of real quick housekeeping things. You will notice that you're muted, your cameras are turned off, all for the purpose of sound quality here today, but you can interact with us. At the bottom of your screen, there's both a Q&A and a chat box. You can ask your questions there. You can chat with one another there. We are certainly going to leave time at the end for you to ask questions. We would love for this to be interactive. And we're glad that you are here to join us today. We want to make sure we get all of your questions answered before we leave. So, Chrissy, as we kind of start off with this topic, I know that we have thought over the last 13 years, the data would kind of show that the first few weeks for Tennessee Promise, tnAchieves students, are really, really crucial. We tend to see if they're going to leave, they leave pretty early in the process. So kind of a two-part question here. So first, what can mentors be doing right now, week one, and then through the first few weeks to support students to make sure that they're successful?
No, that's a really great question. And, if you reflect on all of the characteristics that we've spoken to you about, specifically in generalizations about more fragile student populations, I think about the first generation student, right, who often find that this time is incredibly intimidating. We just heard from our bridge cohort about how intimidated they were to step onto a college campus. And so I think we oftentimes forget, especially in light of the pandemic, that maybe the student has never even been to campus before. College visits are true for some, but not for all. And so just thinking about where your classes are can be incredibly intimidating. Graham and I have a story from way back in the tnAchieves days about students not understanding their class schedule and what MWF means, that Monday, Wednesday, Friday means when they print off their schedule. It's those sorts of hiccups coupled with anxiety and intimidation that will, in many ways, encourage the student to walk away. Because if no one in your family has gone before, this is not the norm. This is not what you do. And for many of our students, they have to prioritize family. They're taking care of siblings. They're also working, some full time. I met a student at Roan State during summer bridge who had a 3-year-old, lived on her own, and was working 40 hours a week at the local Dairy Queen. And my mind was blown for her. And so all that lead up to say the encouragement piece during this time is incredibly important. So really leaning into, you can do it, I am here. And maybe you don't hear back from them, but sending them those words of encouragement could be a game changer as they remember the student, Graham, that sat in her car for the first full week, too afraid to go in. Maybe all they need is that little nudge to get them in, or say, I would love to process your first day of class with you. Let me know. I'm here if you need me. Those kinds of things can be game changing. And you can do that via Connect. You can call them and leave them a voicemail. You can also send them words of encouragement via text. So I think it's whatever you as the mentor have found to be the most effective form of communication, lean into that now. Making sure, as Graham said, that student stays this critical first semester, I think is the most important thing that you can provide that student, a solid foundation. Because I will tell you, I went to an incredibly supportive post-secondary environment, but as a first generation kid, the first few weeks were awful for me. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't want anyone to know that all of these thoughts were swirling around through my head. So having someone that I could have just been like, I'm afraid, or maybe they say I've got it, and that's great too. But just letting them know that someone's there will be a game changer for many of our students. So please utilize this time to encourage, to make sure they're getting there on time, that they're giving themselves plenty of time to park if their classes are in fact in person, and that they're showing up for those Zoom classes, even if they feel like, it's the first day, right? Like really helping to normalize those behaviors that we know students must exhibit in order to be successful.
I think it's really important. I visited 7 or 8 of our bridge programs this summer too, and anytime I was with a group of students that get that advice question, I think it's really important to let students know, like, anyone who's ever been to college before has struggled, right? Whether it's me and the math test, other people that don't write papers as well, or that balancing your full-time job and those home commitments, and that's normal. That not everyone is necessarily going to come out and say like, hey, I'm having a hard time right now. But at some point you're going to struggle. And I think that it's okay to just let students know that if you've ever been to college before, you struggled at some point, and it's a normal thing to feel.
No, I think that's totally, it's not just first gen kids, right? Like we've all struggled in post-secondary at some point. I've never met anyone along my journey who said like the entire college experience was a breeze for me. So I think that's a really valid point.
I was the student who on paper, was supposed to go to college and be successful. And that first semester was, it's eye-opening to find yourself I went to UT, a large university where there's no accountability if you're not going to class. It's easy to get behind. It's easy to get lost. I think so any of our students can use that encouragement piece for sure.
Absolutely.
Maybe some really like tangible things that you can reach out and talk to your students about. I know, for example, I wouldn't want to help a student who's behind in math. It's probably not a place that I would be able to plug in really. But we do hear a lot from students about like time management and just kind of generally managing their calendar. So what are some things that you think, regardless of where you come from in life as a mentor, you could probably help some students?
Yeah, I think time management is key, right? We've been doing this, Graham and I, together for 12 years, and I've been here 13. And every year we survey our students to ask them what they wish they knew prior to stepping into their freshman first semester. And they say how to better manage their time. So any tips on time management, especially for those of you who are juggling? I think about, I have 3 children and 2 jobs, right? And thinking about like all the responsibility and helping students understand, like, I'm gonna keep a, wonky background, but if you keep some sort of agenda or how to write things down, how to make a to-do list, like those sorts of things can be game changing for our students, because what we hear from students time and again is that they don't feel well equipped in the time management space, because high school for many of them was not that difficult. And then they're thrown into this post-secondary environment where, to Graham's point, the accountability is next level, right? Like no one's reminding them or giving them extra credit necessarily. It's like, hey, in 4 weeks, you have a paper due. And then the 4 weeks come, and making sure the student has the paper in on time is critical. That transition from teacher to professor, and not to say that the professors are not wonderful, but I do think that that is a shock to their system. So that time management piece and prioritization, I think, is incredibly important. And so, I don't know any adult that doesn't have some sort of time management system. And so beginning to share those tips of along the way, I think would be incredibly important. I also think, ensuring that your students are checking their email. So that piece of the puzzle is incredibly important. I know email is like old and lame, right? But this is where they're going to receive all their communication from tnAchieves. So if a student, for example, had their high school email on file, they're not getting our emails anymore. And so making sure that we have up-to-date information would be incredibly beneficial to tnAchieves. So if you want to connect with your student just to double check, hey, is this your email address? Are you checking it? What about your college account? Have you been keeping up with that? Because that's where your professors will send you things as well. I think those 2 tips alone can be game-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And your students can always reach out to our staff. We can update their emails. I know if I was a college student, I would want everything coming to my college email, right? So anything they want to change, we can get that done in our system. Byron got out a little bit ahead of me here on our next question and was saying that we need to remind mentors about all of the support services that are offered at the colleges. So some of our mentors maybe haven't been on a college campus as recently as yesterday, like you and I were. What resources are available for students on the college campus, whether academic, maybe mental health services, things like that?
That is so great. And yes, something that we help students navigate all the resources. So Tennessee Achieves is not gifted in academic supports, for example. That's not our lane. And so we lean heavily into the colleges and the resources they provide in an effort to ensure that students are being met exactly where they are. So to Graham's point, counseling services. I mean, we continue to hear about the mental health crisis that many of our students are facing, even pre-pandemic, but especially in light of COVID. So that is available for students who, for example, had an IEP in high school, reaching out to the correct office. Oftentimes that's the Office of Disability Services at the college to make sure that that IEP can then translate into whatever additional help that they may need during their post-secondary journey. There are tutors, there are math labs, there are all sorts of different resources in an effort to ensure that students can find success. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I utilized a tutor during college, and I graduated top of my class in high school. And so there is no shame in tutoring. I had a math tutor, I had a Spanish tutor, I had all sorts of different tutors. I was not going to fail and had a lot of fire in my belly. And I think helping the students understand that, again, to Graham's point, normalizing that, like, we've all done that at some point, I think is a gift that you can give your students, especially in the beginning, when they're not reading their emails and they haven't been to campus, when they, weren't paying attention like they should be during orientation. A reminder of those things can be critical. And so the easiest way for a mentor to find those resources would be send the student to the website. Every website under the community college umbrella system for your institution, even the TCAT, have something to be said around student services. And you can always reach out to us and we can help you navigate that with your student as well.
So let's talk a little bit about our Tennessee Promise specific students that our mentors are working with. What about that student that is still eligible, they haven't heard from in a little while? What advice do you have?
Hang with it. This is the time to pour gasoline on that communication. I always say, and you've probably heard me say it if you've been mentoring with us for a while, don't let that non-communicative student hurt your feelings, right? Like, we are the grown-ups in this situation. And so just continue to encourage, to make sure that they understand that you're in their corner, that you believe that college is the right option for that student. I will tell you, the value proposition around college right now, I think needs a revamp for this group of students. And then in many ways, we are facing a higher education crisis where students don't necessarily connect the value to post-secondary. I don't know if that is this generation. I don't know if it's pandemic. I don't know if it's society in general. I wish I did know the answer to it, but I do know that it's real, and that we are relying on our volunteer mentors to help us share the message that it is a critical time to start post-secondary. And remember, unless there's some insane circumstance, in order to retain their Tennessee Promise eligibility, students must begin the fall directly following high school graduation. And so military would be an example of an extreme circumstance, some sort of documented hospitalization or illness. But outside of that, Tennessee Promise rule is fairly straightforward in the fact that we want you to start in the fall, and that is also dependent on your Tennessee Promise scholarship eligibility.
Yeah, this feels like a really good time to preview what we're doing next week. Next week, you've gotten some emails from us, the past couple of weeks. We're providing an update in all 90 counties that we serve. And so kind of talking about that value proposition that Christy mentioned, we're going to give you some real hard data on students in your local community. We're also going to do a statewide version of that presentation. Hope that you can join us because you're going to see that the early Tennessee Promise numbers have been really, really good, and the pandemic has thrown us a curveball. So we're going to provide you with that update next week. Hope that you can join us for one of those. So kind of continuing this theme of the students that maybe aren't the most communicative, what if a mentor is working with a student and they find out that that student come day one didn't show up, didn't go, maybe is having some doubts? How would you work with a student like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I would first listen to why the student is deciding not to follow through with something that clearly they had intended to do, right? I mean, so if the student has made it this far and has registered for classes, I would argue they have some fire in their belly. And so listening first and then trying to tap into that student's why, reminding them of why they went this far anyway, I think would be incredibly important. And then again, normalizing and sharing with them if you had any doubts along the way, I think would be incredibly important. But how happy you were that you pushed through, or how thankful you are to those who helped you along the way. And then again, just leaning into that encouragement space and to say, like, we can get through this together, I think would be incredibly important. I also think getting that student on our radar so we can also lean into that space with the student to say, to talk them through eligibility, to talk them through that we believe they can do it, and hanging in there. I can't tell you how many students my team has talked to over the years that said, I don't want to do this. And we say, just hang in there, right? Like, this is going to be to your benefit. I do know that many students have the pandemic on their mind, and work has stepped into the space in new and unique ways of helping support their families. And so I'm not trying to be not understanding of those situations, but I also think, like, you've got to think about this as a marathon and not a sprint. This is for your long-term success, and doing the best you can as we work with students to try to encourage them. Let's figure out a way that works for you so that you can help support your family and be a successful college student. It is a hard and fine balance, though.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a couple of questions from Maureen here. One says, what email do we use to send communication to students now? And the second question she has is, if a student finishes coursework at a TCAT this fall, is there an exemption for them if they wish to start another TCAT program or at a community college?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the TCAT question first. If they receive something that is considered a terminating degree, they would no longer be eligible for Tennessee Promise. So if you started a TCAT and you say are in the HVAC program and you earn that HVAC certificate, then you lose your Promise eligibility after earning that certificate. It doesn't preclude the student from moving to a different institution, but the Promise funding would not follow that student. It is important to note, though, that many of our students receive other types of funding like Pell Grants, Hope Scholarship. And so digging into that, if that's what the student desires, I think would be an important next step there. What was the first question, Graham? Sorry, remind me again.
What email are we using to reach out to students now?
What email are we using? So we're using the email that the student has provided to us. So for many of our students, that would be the email that they provided on their Tennessee Promise application. Some students have reached out to update their email, and we do ask students to update their emails multiple times over. And so we are at the mercy of the student and or parent to tell us what is the most up-to-date email address, and that is the one that we currently have on file.
Yes, and any email that is updated in our system will be updated in Connect, so you will have access to that. It feels like a good time to ask about using the video conferencing feature in Connect. What resources do we have for mentors that they can be using to work with students right now?
What resources do we have for our mentors? That's a great question. So I would say utilize Connect. We invested a great amount of time and resource into lifting up Connect for all mentors. And I know virtual meetings are not for everyone, but it also has a lot of other really great features for our mentors. I mean, personally, I love, because our team takes on students every year, is that there's one place where I can find all the information on my students. So it is such a great, like, organizing tool to see which of your students are eligible, which of your students are not eligible, and where your students are in the process. So that alone, I feel like has been a huge value add for our mentoring program. You can utilize the video chat, which I've also done and find to be really amazing in that space. It's secure. You can connect with your students. You can schedule time to connect with your students and connect with your students and connect. We do this all the time at tnAchieves, which I love. So I would say that is a resource. Our website has a ton of resources on it in terms of helping your students navigate processes. I think that is an incredibly important resource. And also we have, and very few, I think, mentors really follow us, but we have a robust social media, both with Facebook and Instagram, where we are posting deadlines, we are posting requirements, we're posting things like student find your why videos, which has been a campaign that we've been running here since January. And so if students need some peer motivation, they can find that there. Also, you can always just connect directly with our team via email, via phone. We are happy to answer any questions that mentors have during this critical time.
Yeah, absolutely. Derek just put a question into the box here, and it's a question that I've been answering from mentors quite a bit this week. A student that has some questions about the financial piece, maybe the scholarship has not been applied to their account yet. How does that work? When should they expect it to get there? What can students be doing to make sure everything's in line so that when they start classes next week, or some of them start the other day, the promise is here and ready to go?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and one that we've been answering every fall since we launched the program in 2009. And so for us, the most important thing that the mentor can do is make sure that the student is promise eligible and has the correct institution listed. And so those are the two questions. Have you met all the requirements of Tennessee Promise? Right, and what is your institution of choice? And you can find all that in Connect, right, Graham? All of that is there, if I'm remembering correctly. And so you can even see that to double check for the student that what they're telling you is actually what's matching in Connect. If those two things are true, the college does know that the student is coming for them, and they will direct the funds to the right institution. So let me walk you through a scenario. Perhaps this is the easiest way to understand it. So let's say Graham is my mentee, and Graham reaches out and says, Pellissippi State, I continue to hear from them that, or I continue to see in my account, maybe is a better way to say this, that my Tennessee Promise funds have not been added. So you would ask the student where they intend to go, right? And if they met all the requirements, and then I would check and Connect to make sure that's true. A lot of times it is right up until the wire that the colleges are actually connecting Tennessee Promise with that student. And for many of the colleges, it is a manual process, and we send them thousands of students. And so making sure that eligibility is there and that the college is correct is the best step that we can all do. And then if the student is still hesitant, I would just encourage the student to reach out to the college and ask financial aid if they're all buttoned up and ready to go. Unfortunately, we can't see directly into the college system. That would be the dream of dreams at tnAchieves. But making sure they're all buttoned up, I think, is the best next step for mentors.
Great. I want to remind all of our audience that you can ask us questions both in the chat box or in the Q&A box. But I guess as we kind of wrap up the questions that we've had prepared to talk about today, want to certainly give our audience members time to ask questions. So please put those in either of the boxes if you have questions. But kind of any final advice on working with students as they begin college through that really important first semester?
Yeah, I would say, my piece of advice is to always try to put yourself in the student shoes. If you can rewind back, for many of you, it wouldn't be too far. For those of us like me, it is a bit further away, but trying to tap into the feeling of being a brand new college student. And thinking about what would have helped you be successful, or what you had that did in fact make you successful. And we can't be all things to all students, but if we can, again, provide that encouragement, provide those words of affirmation. I think that goes a long way for our students. And then being there to help troubleshoot. That's what my team wakes up every day and thinks about, really, is like, how do we put out fires for students? If there was like a tagline under our mission, it's sort of that, we are the fire extinguisher in many ways of higher ed, happily, and we love playing that role. But again, we rely on our mentors to really elevate those fires to us, especially during this time. That's so critical, and there's so many moving parts across the state. So my advice would be, if you haven't already, take 5 minutes today and connect with your students, so at least they know, even the non-responsive ones, that you're there if they need you.
Yeah, absolutely. Carol has a question about Connect and how it gets updated. So she asked, are her students connecting their colleges, or sorry, updating their colleges in Connect? Where is that information coming from? If your students aren't super active in Connect, is it still accurate?
Yes, so they still receive, if they're not active in Connect, they have been loaded in Connect, and they will still receive communication from Connect that you are attempting to connect with them. That was a lot of connects in that sentence, connect. But we actually are updating that information in Connect. I'm not sure, Graham, on a daily basis at this point. I don't know what Tyler's cadence is, but it is being updated by tnAchieves and not by the student, so that it is an actual official update.
Right. Yes. So that information is coming from the college, like the application and enrollment is coming from the college. The college that they are choosing to attend is coming from the state. So it's coming from the state to tnAchieves, and then we're putting it into Connect. And it is being updated daily. So any of those changes that your students are making, it's not quite live, as in they click change their college at 8:27 a.m. Central Time. It's not going to show up at 8:28, but it is going to show up within the next 24 hours. So Angela asked a question, is it possible that a student receives sufficient federal and state aid to cover tuition and fees, that Tennessee Promise is not needed? And then what advice would you have for continuing to work with those students, and should they keep up with their deadlines?
Angela, what a great question. So you're right in the fact that in this moment in time, if they are full Pell eligible, for example, Tennessee Promise would not provide any tuition and mandatory fee dollars, because that would be fully covered by other aid. However, my argument would be that is the student that actually needs tnAchieves the most, because all of those students in that full Pell example receive a complete coach. So we now have a team of complete coaches here who wake up every day working specifically with those students. And the reason that they're working with those students is that the data shows us that they are the least likely to go and the first to leave if they do enroll. And so this team wakes up and is proactively working alongside mentors to ensure that those students earn a post-secondary credential. And what we found, that initiative is called Complete. So since launching Complete, what we've seen is a gap closure between the fully Pell eligible students and our normal not normal students, that's not the way to say it, for our students who are more economically advantaged. And so for us, that gap closure is huge. So I would say that they need tnAchieves just as much as the student who is getting that last dollar scholarship. So please continue to work with them. Please continue to encourage them to retain their Tennessee Promise eligibility, especially considering that financial circumstances change all the time. And so you never know if that full Pell eligibility will translate into the next academic year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, remember that I think Tennessee Promise is more than just money, right? It's a program. And so the money, we've said this a million times over the last 13 years, but the money brings them to us, but it's the support systems that are in place that help to make sure students are successful. Kenner just asked a question about the upcoming 2022 year, which I was going to save for the end, but he asked the question, so let's go ahead and answer it. He asked, will mentors and students be meeting individually face-to-face next year in 2022? So I'm going to turn this into a two-part question. One, what does the mentoring program look like for next year? We have recently finally decided on that. And two, how do they stay involved with this if that's what they want to do?
Yeah, so first of all, please come back. Like, the mentor recruitment push is on. And so I will say I've been incredibly impressed with our mentor team being led by Tyler Ford, who is just really pushed in to ensure that mentors and students still have an impactful relationship in light of all things virtual during the pandemic. So huge shout out to the team there. We need you more than ever. As I said, this is really, in my mind, a higher education crisis that we're facing. And so mentorship matters now, perhaps more than ever. So you can just let us know that you're hoping to come back by simply responding to an email and say, I would like to mentor again. It can be really that simple, especially for returning mentors. If you want to help us recruit mentors, you can go to our website, tnAchieves.org. There's a really simple application there. And then we will begin working with any new mentor to ensure that they are well equipped and trained to meet with the new cohort of students beginning in mid-February. But to say this, what are we doing? That's a really great question. So number one, every mentor will still have access to Connect, and we have a very concerted effort on how to ensure that students will then be loaded also into Connect. So just like this year, you will have the capacity to meet with your students in that safe and I think really effective environment. We are also promoting 2 in-person options, and you can do both, right? Or you could pick one or the other, or you could simply meet with your students virtually via Connect. But the 2 options are, we are lifting up some post-secondary, what we're calling open houses. This will not be mandatory for students, but we're going to choose our language very carefully. And so students and mentors will be able to meet in person during a planned Tennessee Achieves event. I will say there will not be a presentation from Tennessee Achieves at that time, but we will provide space and the opportunity for mentors and students to get to know one another during that open house. And we'll look to our post-secondary partners to provide some programming so the student can get to know that institution during their time there as well. We also are going to encourage mentors to meet with their students one-on-one. Must be in a public space, not putting the student in the car. Our mentors have been doing this for a very long time. We haven't promoted it quite as much as we plan to this year, but I know Randy Boyd, for example, our board chair, offers to take his young men from South Doyle High School in Knoxville to pizza every year to meet the students and the parents prior to the team meeting. So something like that, but it doesn't have to be pizza. It can be the park, right? But again, somewhere public and somewhere not in the car. So Connect, open house, and then a meeting that the mentor and student come together independently to decide to meet. That is what we're planning to do.
Yeah, it's not something we've ever really pushed, but we had a mentor this past summer that a student didn't necessarily feel real good about going live back on a campus yet, and they met in the local park every day outside, and the mentor did her own summer bridge program with the student and got her ready for that placement test. So we know that it's happening, and it seems like a really good opportunity. It's also a really nice way to kind of piggyback on a question that Teresa asked about what we plan to do to increase connectivity and make sure students are more responsive to their mentors. She's had a tough year, it sounds like, getting them to respond. And, we think this is one of those things that will help. When your students know that you are a real person on the other end of those text messages and those emails, we think that will increase it. But Chrissy, you can add anything to that you like.
Yeah, we also talked here about asking the mentors to record a short, 30-second video of themselves and sending it to students, just introducing hey, I'm Chrissy, this is what I look like, this is what I do, who I am, and I'm excited to work with you. I think to Graham's point, it's really difficult to build relationships with students when they don't see you and know that you are in fact a person on the other side of those text messages or Connect messages. It's tough. And again, it's a mixed bag. I think every year for mentors who have been coming back to us, I've heard from many of our mentors that this was their best year yet, that they love Connect, it's been game changing in terms of their ability to work with students. But we've also heard from other mentors it's been really tough. So again, I think it depends on the group of students that you're assigned, which is random outside of location every year. But we are going to do the very best that we can to continue to encourage students to utilize that platform. So hang in there with us, Teresa.
And I think there's a real opportunity next year at these open house style events that we're hosting. We've floated this by a few of the colleges now, and it sounds like they plan to have staff there that can help students complete an application. For students that have already applied, they can let them know what they're missing. They can sign any papers that they might be missing, complete financial aid packages. So I think there's a real opportunity that these open house events can become very, very beneficial. One, for the mentor-student relationship, and two, just for the students getting everything done while they're at the college. So we have a real opportunity there.
I also will add this, just like when you're meeting with your students in person, one student communicating with you is a big deal. That is a human student that you are moving the needle on. And so I always say, and I've been saying this forever, don't judge your success as a mentor based on the number of students that you are hearing from. We give you more students than you're going to hear from every year. It's intentional because every kid, 89% of high school seniors apply for Tennessee Promise. Think about that. And 89% of high school seniors do not plan to utilize Tennessee Promise. They're off to UT, not Promise eligible. They're off to Vanderbilt, not Promise eligible. ETSU, MTSU, the list goes on. And they're not intending to use Tennessee Promise. So we still provide the student with a mentor because many of our four-year institution students do utilize that mentor during this critical transition time, but many of them don't. And so if you got one student to be responsive, in my mind, huge win, excellent job at mentoring, gold star.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you got to think about it as one student at a time. If you get one student in your group of 5 or 6 that wasn't going to go to college before they met you, that's how we meet the Drive to 55 goal. It's one student at a time. If 7,500 mentors each work with one student that wasn't going to go to college before, that's how we make that progress towards our Drive to 55 goals. Now ask, we have dates for those open houses yet? We just landed on this 2 weeks ago and are just starting to float it to our college partners. So not quite yet. We're going to start working on that here pretty soon. Looks like that's all the questions that we have. I know I asked for your final advice kind of as the questions were coming in, but anything you'd like to close us out with?
No, just a sincere thank you for those of you who hung with us this year. You don't do it for Tennessee Achieves. You do it because you believe in education and you believe in students, and that's why we do it. But we can't thank you enough. This lift is too large to do it without you. And like I said, this year is, in my mind, the most critical year we will have. Class of 22 will be important because we have to bring this momentum back to the post-secondary space. So truly, thank you. We're so grateful and appreciative and look forward to working with you as we lift up new ideas, try a lot of things and keep what works, right, Graham?
That's right.